Well, now I'm pleased to introduce our first presenter today, Tom ZR6TG, who comes to us live from his workshop in South Africa. During the past year, Tom has published a number of innovative DATV software tools, and he'll describe them in his talk. And I'm pleased to tell you that you can ask questions or make comments using either Zoom or the BATC streamer during his talk, and I'll read as many as I can to him after the presentation. But now, over to Tom. Welcome to CAT22, Tom. You're muted, I think, sorry. That's all right. I think it's on the Zoom, Tom, that you're muted, so.
There we go.
Got you there.
Excellent. Sorry about that. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tom, Zulu Romeo 6 Tango Golf, and I'm talking to you from sunny South Africa. My QTH is in Vanderbijlpark, which is it's a small town about 100 kilometers away from Johannesburg. And by day, I'm a research and development engineer, and after hours, a general geek. My interest in amateur radio started a couple of years ago when I was playing with high altitude balloons, and it blossomed into a fun new hobby with a special interest in both satellite, or especially satellite, both LEO and geosynchronous. Unfortunately, well, first I wanted to show a bit of my setup here at my QTH. As you can see, it's mostly satellite related stuff, although I do have the odd 2 meter and HF antenna there as well. Unfortunately, ATV and DATV experimentation in South Africa are basically non-existent. And my journey in DATV started specifically because of the QO100 satellite. More specifically, the wideband transponder on the QO100. There's more and more ZS stations from South Africa joining the fun every week. So I'm hoping this will start a bit more of a DATV experimentation revolution locally for us here in South Africa. So obviously, I'm fully aware that most of you guys are aware of the QO100, but if you're not, and if not, why not? The wideband QO100 transponder basically has a bandwidth of 8 megahertz and is designed mostly for doing DATV experiments, although there's room for testing with other experimental wideband digital modes. I'm not going to go into too much detail on how to use the QO100 wideband transponder, as the BATC wiki has lots of great information on getting started and going on that. I'm also still very much new to ATV and DATV. Only been playing with it since end of last year. So the following information that I'm going to share to you today in this presentation is mostly based on my own experiences. But as with most things in our hobby, there's many ways to skin a cat, which is why it's always important to share what we learn and also to have fun together. So today I wanted to share some of the developments around DATV software in the hope of starting more discussions about the software we use, how we can improve it, and to inspire more programmers to jump in and play along. The rest of this presentation consists of various projects I've worked on in the past year. Most of these are developed out of specific needs that I had, or just random experiments as I explore the various software that's already available. Keep in mind, this is just an overview. So if you see any of these projects that you want more details on and more documentation on, feel free to go check out my website, which is www.zr6tangogolf.co.za. So getting back to the QO100 wideband transponder, there's a lot of cool content on there, regular nets and regular transmissions on the satellite. But I always felt restricted to that I had to be in my shack to be able to view these transmissions. In a world today where services like Netflix are very common, why do I need to be restricted to my shack just to be able for DATV reception? So the idea kickstarted a bit my first development, where I started to do some research about being able to view these transmissions while I was maybe lying in bed during the winter's night or busy elsewhere in and around the house. Essentially, I wanted to put the content on my home network. So after some research, I found the Longmynd software packages. This is essentially open source Linux DATV receiver that was developed by Heather Lamont back in 2019. And it's a command line application which does similar functionality than what the mini tuner software does, except that there's no graphical interface to it. It does the same control and configurations, and the specific Longmynd project has been adopted by various other projects by the BATC. You'll find it in the Ryde receiver, in ports down, etc. Essentially, the video stream that is received by Longmynd is made available on UDP ports, and you can then use VLC to connect to it and view these streams. Further in my research, I actually found a version of Longmynd that was forked from the original one, and by Phil Crump. He was doing some experiments on adding a web interface to Longmynd. It seemed like it was still very much a work in progress, but one of the important bits that he added was a WebSocket interface. And over this WebSocket interface, you could basically get the status of the tuner, get all the information, and also send commands back. And that was essentially the last piece that was missing for my network idea to put something together. So the basic idea of the network DATV receiver is to pair the mini tuner hardware with a Raspberry Pi with the custom Longmynd software. Controlling Longmynd with the required parameters such as the frequency to listen on and which symbol rates to use, amongst others, is then all done via the WebSocket. The video feed as received by the tuner is made available by Longmynd on a UDP port. We can use a Raspberry Pi for this network DATV receiver, specifically because there's not a lot of processing required. Longmynd doesn't actually decode the video and audio feed, but rather just pass the data along on a UDP port. So now that we've got a receiver, we essentially needed a client to be able to view these transmissions and control Longmynd. So this was the basic client that I started to develop to receive data from Phil's custom Longmynd. I aptly named it the Longmynd Client. It receives status messages continuously over the WebSocket, and it also connects to the UDP port of Longmynd to get the video and audio. The client needed to be able to decode this video and audio, so it makes heavily use of the VLC development libraries for the decoding. The client can also send commands to the tuner via the WebSocket to change the frequency and other settings. I shared this test version with a few of my DATV friends, and lots of suggestions came in to improve it. One of the most requested suggestions was to add something similar to the Quicktune application that was developed by Rob Swinbank. Now, the Quicktune application essentially connects to the online wideband spectrum monitor. It retrieves the data that it needs and it shows it on a simple interface. But it also adds some smarts into it where it allows you to tune or select specific signals. So it can detect the signals, show some basic information about it, and you can, by clicking on it, tune your Ryde or your mini tuner to the specific to the signals. Luckily, all of the source code from Rob's Quicktune was available, so it was very simple to see how it worked and to implement that in my Longmynd client as well. I also managed to do a few changes to his code and push it back to the repository, which is essentially the beauty of open source. So speaking of the wideband monitor, it works great in principle, but if you're in a country like mine where power and internet is not always guaranteed, what do you do when the internet is down? We don't want to start transmitting if we can't monitor the spectrum, since you could potentially interfere with someone else's signal. This also applies to having a mobile DATV setup or station, something which I'm looking into very much. And you don't know, depending on where you are, you won't necessarily have cell phone service. So I started digging into how the BATC actually put together their online spectrum monitor. And in short, it can be broken down into the following pieces. There is a FFT server that was also developed by Phil, and it's pretty smartly done. The FFT server uses an SDR and receives the spectrum of the complete wideband transponder directly from the satellite. It does some fancy math stuff that I'm still figuring out, but essentially it outputs a clean average FFT that shows the complete spectrum. It outputs all of this data basically on a WebSocket. From there, it's just about any application can connect to that WebSocket and to retrieve the data. in the case of the online BATC server, the website that we all casually visit connects to the FFT server and gets the data and displays it in a way that makes sense to the user. This is the same data that Quicktune and ultimately Longmynd Client uses to create smart Quicktune. So I was thinking to see if there's a way that we can essentially replicate this in an offline way for if there's no internet. Since the code of the FFT server is available on the BATC repo, I grabbed a copy from there and I went about getting it to run on a Raspberry Pi. It's not very processor intensive code, so Raspberry Pi 2, Raspberry Pi 3 is more than adequate to run it. It turned out to be quite simple to get the original code going. The more tricky part is now that we've got the data coming in, we needed an interface. So because we were already running a Raspberry Pi with the FFT server on there, it was just a simple way of loading a web server on there. And what I did was I created almost a clone version of the online website into a more simplified one. Something that doesn't include the chat and some other stuff, but it does include the spectrum. And all of that then works in an offline manner. So you can still monitor signals regardless of whether you've got internet or not. The online version, however, still has real-time chat on the page, which is something that we're missing on our side. It's still a work in progress, but I've got a few ideas around that, which basically involves transmitting the chat data on the satellite as well. Maybe we can use something like the AMSAT DL high-speed modem, which is already running the multimedia beacon on a narrowband transponder. Keep in mind that if you want to try your own little offline server like what I did, is that you would need to use the AirSpy SDR as it was designed initially for that. And the main reason it used that specific SDR is that it needed to have the bandwidth to pull the complete spectrum in one go. One of the ideas that we're experimenting with is to change it to use an RTL dongle, one of the cheaper SDR dongles, which you can essentially get the same effect by scanning the spectrum in bits and pieces and then putting together a bigger picture. So that's still something that's a work in progress. So other advantages of running an FFT server like this on a Raspberry Pi in our shack is that we can actually connect our Quicktune application to it as well as Longmynd directly to it. So when the internet goes down in those cases, you can still use those tools. What I like about the Raspberry Pi is that I could easily throw a LCD on the Pi and create myself a little gadget for the shack. Something that can show the time and even a simple spectrum of the wideband transponder. This works great for quickly monitoring the activity on the QO100 DATV without having to open up any programs or sitting behind a computer. This was a fairly quick hack put together using Python and a graphics library called Pygame. We already have all the data supplied on the FFT server, and since it can take multiple connections, why not make use of it in a few more places? By the way, there's also the same shack gadget also works with the online version of the BATC spectrum monitor. So you don't have to do the offline version if you want to build a gadget like this. Now, if you go back to the modified Longmynd from Phil, you will remember that it basically allows us to get information on currently tuned signal, basically the status of the receiver. As I said, we get all of this information by our WebSocket, and because it allows multiple connections on the same port, we could retrieve this information in multiple applications. Another one of the issues that I had was to be able to easily fine-tune my dish to the QO100 beacon. One of the features that I added into Longmynd was basically a little dish calibration helper. It was actually suggested by one of the guys using it as well. And it basically shows you the signal strength in a nice big view. And you can also enable some sound where the frequency of the sound will change depending on your signal strength. This works great if you can see your laptop. And since we're a network, you can essentially take the laptop on top of the roof as well and fine tune it there. The problem with that is I almost had a few near misses where my laptop almost fell off the roof. So I figured I needed to implement something a bit more safer. Now, one of the ideas that I had was to maybe, why can't I use my cell phone for this? We're all carrying around our cell phones. It's a lot more smaller and easier to use. So since all that information was already available from Longmynd, it was pretty easy to develop an application that receives the information in real time and shows it on the screen. So what you see there is essentially the Windows version of the little app that I developed. The framework that I used for it was Flutter. Flutter is a mobile application framework that allows you to develop something that is cross-platform. So excuse me. So the same application will work on an Android, iOS, even Windows or Linux machine. So it's a fairly simple application, but it works wonders when adjusting the dish. To use it, simply tune to the QR100 beacon. It will show the currently received signal as a real-time value and an average value over the last few seconds, and it will also graph it out for you. So you get a real-time feedback as you're adjusting your dish. The source code for this is all completely available, so you can go and further develop it even more depending on the needs that you have there. It was around this time in all my experimentation that I decided to build a Winterhill system using the advanced receiver design from the BATC wiki. As you know, most of you know, this is a great receiver that allows us to receive 4 DATV transmissions at the same time. And it's a completely self-contained unit with the Raspberry Pi just plugging into it. This appealed to me because if we apply the same concept of the Longmynd client onto it, then we can receive different channels on different devices because we've got 4 channels that we can share. It's essentially the perfect network DATV receiver. The Winterhill software was originally designed and developed by Brian, G4EWJ, and I reached out to Brian with some questions and quickly realized that the core of it was also using a modified Longmynd instance. At this point, I forked the Winterhill code to a separate repo and modified it with the same WebSocket code that was in Phil's version of the Longmynd code. So a couple of changes to our Longmynd client, and we now had a Winterhill client. Completely the exact same concept with the same functionality, but with the ability to tune to 4 different channels. And it also allows us to have one client running on one PC, another client running on another PC, and both of them being able to watch different channels since we have 4 channels available. We now have the same type of control of the tuner that we had in Longmynd. But like I said, with 4 UDP ports for receiving video and audio. I believe there's a lot more that we can do with the advanced receiver in Winterhill, and I still have lots of different ideas I want to try. So the projects I've shown you up to now has mostly been more of the bigger, more polished projects. But in between, I've been playing with some various experiments and proof of concepts. And essentially, the first proof of concept is very similar to the Longmynd client. I just asked myself, why do we need to restrict ourselves to a computer when we all carry around cell phones, same as the calibration aspect? And so I developed another little app in Flutter, which is the exact same concept as the Longmynd client in that it connects to the Longmynd server and receives the status of all the signals that are there, and also live video and audio from there. Android's got some very nice VLC development libraries that allowed me to be able to decode the video and display it as well. This one was a bit more of a challenge as your screen estate is a lot smaller than from a PC or a laptop aspect. So especially one part I had a problem was the Spectrum monitor or the Quicktune from Rob. And I ended up, you'll see in the bottom left corner there's these blue buttons. And what I ended up making is creating dynamic buttons that will appear for each signal detected on the spectrum. So then you can just select the signal by clicking on a button and it will tune Longmynd to that signal. There's still a few issues around the software, but the general concept works quite well. And I can now use my tablet or cell phone and anywhere on my network be able to view all the transmissions on the QR100 satellite. Another interesting part of this would be to combine it obviously with the Winterhill as well. Some of my friends that's been playing with the beta test versions of the Android client has also managed to load it on an Android TV. So maybe there's some room where this can be expanded to these Android set-top boxes. Maybe that could be a different type of Ryde receiver. Again, all just ideas that I'm throwing out there to get more people interested in playing and coding with it. So the Android client was interesting and it works, but if we're going this way, then why even limit ourselves to specific phones? How about we just make it accessible via our website? Now, this was a fun experiment because there are so many ways to do this. The initial attempt of this consists of a Linux machine. Unfortunately, the Raspberry Pi just doesn't have enough juice for the encoding and decoding that I needed to do. It was all still very inefficient, so I'm sure there's ways that that can be improved to, at the end of the day, end up going on to a Raspberry Pi or a Jetson Nano. The core concept is a web server with RTMP extensions. We use FFmpeg to take the video audio from the Longmynd UDP port, and then we encode it with the Ryde codecs to stream it as an RTMP stream on our network or out on the internet. So we can essentially open a browser on any device and view the stream. So we are a lot less limited to the specific devices. The next step would obviously be to add some navigation and tuner buttons. Well, I mean, that's a simplified website thing, and it's very easy to do with Phil's WebSocket code on Longmynd. And then we can essentially end up with a web Longmynd client. Which I'm pretty sure is we just went back into a circle back to the original reason why Phil started modifying the Longmynd to include a web interface. But it just goes to show that with the power of the Longmynd, because it's so simplified and generic, we can easily get the data and get the video and audio and use it pretty much anywhere. And then another quickie project that I was doing in between was when I started having a look at the Ryde receiver. Again, based on all the instructions that I got from the BATC wiki, but I realized that I didn't have a decent remote control to control the receiver. So as part of playing with the mobile applications, I built a little Android remote control app that connects to your Wi-Fi network and via that connects to the Ryde. And that can be used as a normal remote for controlling a Ryde. What's nice about this, usually if you grab a random remote and hack it to make it to work with Ryde, you end up with all kinds of buttons you don't need. With this, we've got we can custom design the remote to make it look and work the way we exactly want it to. And then even possibly add the wideband spectrum monitor into the remote as well. It's nothing that big special, but I figured let me share that because it might be interesting and helpful to anybody who wants to build a Ryde receiver who doesn't have a remote control. And then lastly, the last experiment that I did that I wanted to share, which is not necessarily DATV related, but it does integrate well into a DATV setup. As most playing on the QO100, I use a PlutoSDR, and to prevent losses on my signal, I have the PlutoSDR and amplifier in a box on the roof next to the dish. Now, typically one would use one of those USB to network adapters to put it on the network, but I experienced some issues with the USB adapters, especially the ones that I could find locally in South Africa. They work fine for most, your usual SDR console, narrowband aspect, and even some DATV. But especially if you start doing some digital modes or playing with a high-speed modem, for example, it started giving me some issues on the throughput. And I found a note on the AMSAT-DL wiki regarding USB adapters that when using the high-speed modem specifically, they recommend a specific adapter. Since I couldn't find the recommended adapter locally, I decided to try something else. Instead of using the adapter, I plugged the PlutoSDR directly into the network port on a Raspberry Pi. Since the PlutoSDR, once plugged in on USB, already enumerates as an Ethernet device, all we really need to do to make this to work is to set up firewall rules to port forward the incoming data on the Raspberry Pi to the PlutoSDR and vice versa. In my case, I used IP tables, but there's lots of different firewall packages. So it all depends a lot on the distribution you're running on your Raspberry Pi. And again, it hardly uses any processing. So even as simple as a Raspberry Pi Zero with an additional head that gives a network port, As I was saying, it could be as simple as using a Raspberry Pi Zero with a Ethernet head on it, and like I said, all you need to do is just forward the ports. Now, there's a couple of ports that you need to keep in mind if you want to pull this off. First, you need port 22 to be port forwarded, as that's your SSH access. Keeping in mind that you don't want to port forward port 22 from the Raspberry Pi to port 22 on the PlutoSDR, because you still want to be able to SSH directly into the Raspberry Pi. So what I did on mine was my incoming information or data connections on port 23 was then forwarded to port 22. Other ports you will need is port 80 for the website access on the Pluto, port 30431 for SDR software, like SDR console and such. And if you're running one of the custom DATV firmwares, you also need to forward the UDP ports or the RTP ports that you're using to stream in the video, which on mine is typically 8282. Now, before you tell me that it's a waste to use a Raspberry Pi just for putting a Pluto on the SDR, remember you can do so much more than that Raspberry Pi. For example, in my station, I added a little I/O board where I can connect. I've got relays on there and I've got analog inputs in there, so I can add in various temperature sensors and current sensors. So the box on top of my roof next to the dish can now be monitored using the same Raspberry Pi that I'm using to forward the information to the PlutoSDR. So I installed something as simple as Node-RED and interfaced that to the various sources. So now I've got a little dashboard that I can use to toggle the PTT, view the various sensors, and even add outside information like the weather or the QR100 spectrum monitor. So there's a lot of things that you can do with it. So I don't see it as a waste of using specifically a Raspberry Pi on it. And that basically concludes the overview of some of the projects and experiments I've been playing with. None of these projects would have been possible without the support and help from the BATC and various BATC members. And also a very big thank you to the guys from AMSAT-DL who made it possible for us to play with a satellite like this. There's so much things we can do with it, so much room for experimentation. We just need to jump on it and try it out. I would also like to thank all the various testers that were willing to put their hardware at risk with all my crazy software ideas. And then all the guys that also bought me a beer or two in between. If you wanted to get more information on most of the stuff that I showed to you now, you can just go to my website there, www.zr6tg.co.za. It's got much more documented stuff on there than what I showed now. You can always, if you have questions, hit me up on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way. And then obviously, have a look at the BATC website. There's tons of information on there. It's a good place to get started, as well as the AMSAT-DL website. Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for your time, and I hope it was an informative presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. No, it's not goodbye, as you know, because you've kindly offered to stay and answer questions. And we've got quite a while, actually. We've got 20 minutes or so. So if you've been watching this at home as I have and finding it incredible, all of the different projects and ideas that Tom has been involved with, then please ask those questions and make those comments now, either on BATC messaging or on Zoom chat as well, and we'll read as many as we can to Tom. I love that remote control app as well, Tom. I'd missed that one. It looks really cool, actually. That's just any Android phone or tablet, is it? You're muted again, I think, Tom. Sorry. That's all right. That's okay. I can't do it. I can't unmute you, unfortunately. There we go. So that was for just almost any Android sort of phone or tablet?
Essentially, yeah. I use the same Flutter framework for it as well. So in theory, it can be compiled actually for iOS as well. It can even run on a Windows or Linux PC. The only reason why I didn't release a iOS version is you've got to jump through a few more hoops to get that compiled for iPhone. It's something I'm looking into, but essentially it can be compiled and working on any iOS device. It's fairly dynamic and flexible, and all it does is connects over the network to the Ryde interface. So it was a quick little project, and but it works quite well. So I'm very happy with it.
It's lovely. Yes. Okay. Well, we've got a few questions already coming in. Can I just ask you, if you do sign into Zoom, maybe you're not don't use it that much often, if you can sign in with your name and your call sign, if you have one, that would be really helpful, because otherwise I think it defaults sometimes to a number and things, and that makes it very difficult for me to just read out your name if all I've got is a number in front of me. So that would be really good. We have got some questions though. As I said, I'm not sure quite what this pertained to. It was around about 10 minutes ago. Justin Cockett said, this would be cool, Tom, Apple TV 2 ? So I'm not quite sure what you were talking about 10 minutes ago. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think Justin's referring to the Android version of the Longmynd client that we're using on an Android TV device that we experimented with. The Apple TV, it's quite an interesting idea. I'm fairly certain it would work. Again, it's also designed on the Flutter platform. So I would need to do some research to see if it actually supports the Apple TV side of things. But in theory, there's no reason why it shouldn't work that way. The only problem with Apple hardware, and which I'm not a fan of it, is on the Android side, if you develop something, it's very simple just to distribute the APK and the guys can install it and such. On Apple, it's a lot more involved, as they can't just go and install any random software on the Apple devices. So you need to have a developer license and some Apple hardware to test on it. Those things are all, it costs a bit of money in that. But in theory, like I said, the Flutter framework allows compiling for Apple and such hardware, so it should all definitely be possible. I guess it all depends on how many people are interested, and then we can try it out.
Yeah, and I guess if anybody out there is already working with the iOS and the various Apple operating systems as well, could give you a hand, that would be good, and maybe fast track you to help you with some of those things. Justin actually, Justin came back actually and just said, just fantastic, love using the Pi for the Node Red station monitor. So thanks for that, okay. Justin.
Thanks, Justin.
Dave G8GKQ says, what software languages does Tom specialise in? Formal training or self-trained?
I don't know if you can call it formal trained. It's more self-trained. I did a computer science degree, which we didn't focus on very much on the languages. So a lot of it is self-trained in my career over the years. C, C#, Python, Rust, those are the type of languages I play mostly with. Yeah, I hope that answers it.
Yeah, sure. I'm just busy reading some of the questions and comments coming in. Rob VK3EHT in Australia says, great work, Tom. Wish Australia, though, had access to Oscar 100. I bet there's a fair few Aussies saying that as well.
For sure, yeah.
Gareth Evans says, how's the RPI satellite tracking project coming on? Might the software end up on auto tracking, e.g. satellites or moon?
Yeah, he's referring to one of the projects I didn't show today. I've been working on a Raspberry Pi satellite tracking software package as well. Yes, it can definitely do auto tracking of those of the moon and such like that as well. Anything that you can get a TLE file for can be pulled in and be used. I haven't tried the moon specifically yet, but it's coming along. As you can see, I got distracted a bit with the DATV project, but I'm still very much into developing the RPI tracker even further. In fact, I've got a portable little smaller dish setup going now as well, which I want to turn into a mobile Oscar 100 station as well as LEO satellite station. But that project is still very much a work in progress, so I'll share that at a later date.
All right, good. Well, thank you for all you're doing for this, and everybody else as well who's been involved with these projects. As I said, if you want to ask questions of Tom or make any comments or anything, now's the time to do it. Dave M5TXJ says he can't see the remote software on the website. I'm not sure which website, but maybe you can just clarify which website it's available on, Tom, please.
It's on my website. Let me just quickly open up a browser here. I can tell you exactly.
I think we can actually bring up your website here in the caption, which might help everybody at home. Here we go.
Let me just double check first that it's actually
okay. Well, anyway, for anybody who wants to make a note of that, that's Tom's own website there, www.zr6tg.co.za.
See, I post so the website I keep for the more formal stuff, and I've got another site which I use for the more blogging site. but it feels like a bit of advertising sharing that. You can also look on the BATC forum. I added in a post there with all the information that of the remote control, and also a link directly to the software. I'm fairly certain I posted it on the website as well, but I did post on the other website. David, if I can share screen again.
Yeah, we can do that.
So I've got another little site that I'm just using but basically it's, a few of the guys have wanted to buy me a beer, so I basically signed that up to this site called Buy Me a Coffee. It's buymeacoffee.com/ZR6TG. And so I put a lot of posts on there that is more of these smaller work in progress projects, just to keep people in the loop, and also to say thank you for them, adding a few bucks for a beer or two. So I've actually got it all on there. You can go view it there. I'll create another post on the website as well for it.
Can you just remind us again, Tom, of that website that you're looking at there? This was Buy a Coffee, was it? Can you do that again?
It's buymeacoffee.com/ZR6TG.
So your call sign at the end, okay.
That's right, yeah. Sorry, I thought I had it on the other website as well, but it might have gotten lost among the posts. But yeah, the easiest is if you have a look on the BATC forum as well. I've got it up there with screenshots and the APK, and the code is also on the GitHub for you to go check it out and edit from there.
Okay. A few other comments for you. Nigel2E0EHH says, thank you for all your help to be DATV. Well done. Lots of other people as well. Gareth Ovens saying wonderful stuff. And Paul G6MNJ, excellent projects. I fancy building some of these. Thank you. And Noel, I'm not sure if this is meant for me or us here, but anyway, I'll read it. Would it help if the chat was available as a low data rate stream rather than the embedded in a page? Maybe BATC should buy the Apple app license.
I think he's talking about the offline Spectrum monitor. To be able to, well, not just that, also the Longmynd, to be able to pull in the chat into that software. I think that's what you're talking about, no? Something like that would be great. We actually need to talk and see what we can do to get that information, because for a fully offline station, the missing link is the chat at the moment. And if we can, transmit it somehow via the satellite, we can pull it easily into that. And also, if we I'm not quite sure if it's actually available on the website itself to be pulled via a WebSocket, because then we can also integrate it into something like the Longmynd Client or the Quicktune. Because my concern about the Longmynd Client is that I'm worried, since it shows the spectrum, that a lot of people might not be going back to the website to be involved in the chat as well. And it's fairly important to stay on, or to be able to view that chat just to see if somebody's doing maintenance or if you're interfering with anybody. So something like that would definitely be great. Then we can integrate it in all the other apps as well. And then it provides a fully offline version of, even if you can't send data back to the chat, even if you can just at least be able to view the chat and make sure you're not causing any issues on the transponder.
Yeah, it's great. Well, Noel has come back and confirmed that that's what he meant. A couple of other suggestions associated with that. Mike Willis has said we could put it in the metadata. Justin G8YTZ says, Noel, perhaps a WBHS modem. This is, I guess, something to discussion. And just to let you know, everybody, actually, there will be an open discussion on Zoom at lunchtime, over our lunchtime today, an informal sort of session. So if you're on Zoom and you'd like to chat about any of this sort of thing, that's exactly what the lunch break will be for. And Mike Willis says perhaps it could be included in the beacon, and Noel's come back and said we'll take a look at it. So there we are. Hopefully some others will help with that. Just going on to BATC, some of the messages there now. Dave has says, I have no call sign for Dave, and there's several Daves there, but I guess you know who you are. Have you been able to record the incoming stream, e.g. to record the various nets if you're not at home?
I'm glad you mentioned that. So I've actually got a Longmynd version 2 in the works, where the original Longmynd uses the VLC libraries, but there's a bit of an issue with the libraries, especially when it comes to the volume settings, and I've been fighting with that for a bit. So I started looking at alternatives, and one of the alternatives that I found is that you can actually use FFmpeg embedded in the C# application as well. And the beauty of the FFmpeg library is that you can easily record video as well. It seems to be working quite well. There's, depending on the codec of the stream, there's 1 or 2 streams that I can't seem to record very well, but for the majority it records great. And I've actually been doing recordings. I've got a couple of the previous conferences that I've recorded via that as a test. The app needs a bit of work because there's a few things that are hard-coded for my setup that needs to be changed in configurations and you know, setting screens and stuff like that. But with that, you should be able to record video quite easily. Even add a timer to it so that you can say stop recording after a bit or start recording at a certain time. And then I also added in an auto record similar to the auto snapshot on the original Longmynd client, where if that's selected, any new signal that comes up while it's quick tuning, it starts recording that as well. So that's quite fun, especially if you know there's a net and you can get all these different video files in that. So yeah, give me a couple of days and then I'll have some more information on the website.
You've set yourself a target there, saying a couple of days.
Well, it's already, it's like I say, it's already working. It just needs a bit of cleanup to make it a bit more user-friendly so that it's usable.
Lovely. You're really dedicated to this. It's wonderful. Mike, G0MJW, in kind of reply to Dave, but this might be helpful as well. He says you could do that with VLC record and or FFmpeg. Is what he suggested, is another way around that.
Yeah, you can definitely do that.
And several other thank yous and congratulations and everything from people, including Chris ON1RC says, Tom, thanks for all these great developments. Echoed by lots of people, I'm sure. And Noel has...
Well, thanks, Chris. Chris was one of the guys that actually reached out to me about the dish calibration. And that evolved into a lot of ideas around that. So very thankful for it. Helps getting suggestions and ideas of what the guys want to do, because most of the software is developed to, you know, my needs, but everybody's got other needs. And some of the developments, if it's fairly simple, I've got no issue to quickly put it in there. So keep them coming. And then also I'm also cleaning it up, but the Longmynd client and the Winterhill client software, all of that's going, all the code of that's going onto my GitHub in the next couple of days as well. So anybody can then jump on there and play along and develop along. I think that's the beauty of all of this, is just to be able that everybody can play along and contribute.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you almost as a final question, really, from me, on behalf of probably everybody, is what are you working on next? You said you're working on a version 2 of that software, but other projects, have you got any in mind that you don't mind talking about? Bearing in mind that anything you say now might get people asking you when, but no,
that's fine. No, actually I've been quite jealous of you guys in the UK of being able to do mobile DATV stations. I was inspired by Rob Swinbank's his van setup that he's got going. So my current next project is actually be able to do something similar to that, but more of a South African ruggedized version. So I recently got a small little 4x4 chimney, which should be able to go anywhere in South Africa, and I'm busy putting together a system that will allow me to have a mobile DATV as well. Not so much a software project for everybody else to use, but more of a personal project. But that's the next big thing. I'll have video and pictures soon of a small little 4x4 with a dish on top somewhere, hopefully into a couple of beautiful parks in South Africa, doing the Sunday net from there. So that's the plan, that's the current project. So and then obviously the Longmynd version 2 and all the code going out as well. I know a lot of the guys are anxious to add more features, and you know, it's not practical for me to always add it in, but by releasing all the code, it at least gives other people opportunity as well to work on it and modify it.
Oh, well, thanks, Tom. You said you were jealous of us in England being able to do mobile activity, but as Justin's actually said, and I was thinking the same thing, that we're often jealous, I think, of the weather you get there. So yeah, maybe we can meet in the middle somewhere. This is almost it now. Yeah, we've got, Justin says, I was thinking how the Quicktune extension could be used to have multiple repeater inputs, not requiring dedicated Ryde receivers for each band. And Noel has come back and said a stream not off air recorder app would be useful, as well as several others saying that. Dave M5TXJ said a beer is on the way, Tom, or a coffee, I guess, whatever you like. And
thank you very much.
And lots of other comments said I'll give a shout out to Leo OK2UUJ. Many thanks for all your jobs and work, Tom. And not a question, Tom. This is from Mike Willis, sorry, not a question. I'll try and replicate the tool chain if I get a chance. So there we are. Acting in the true collaborative spirit of which this hobby is. Tom, we want to thank you very, very much indeed for, well, obviously all of your projects, your presentation this morning and your continued work and supporting British Amateur Television Club and the whole amateur television community indeed. Thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you'll be able to stay with us for some of the rest of the day as well, maybe on the Zoom call over lunchtime as well, which is an informal session. But once again, on behalf of everybody, Tom ZR6TJ, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much, and enjoy it. I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference, so I'll definitely be sticking around.
Lovely.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Tom.